Hello and welcome. My name is Eric Butts. I'm an ethical analyst, and together with my colleague Amanda Ozowski, our legal analyst, and Garrett Purdy, our financial analyst, we're here today to represent strategic marketing consultants. I would first like to thank you, the BP Board of Directors, for hiring us today to provide ethical, financial, and legal solutions derived from the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. So first, ethics can be a very broad term, and one must decide from what ethical standpoint they'd like to make their ethical questions and answers. So, we decided to go right into BP's own ethical statement and talk about what BP values, and primarily found a dedication to respect of individuals, communities, and governments. Taken directly from BP's company values, you have said, respect. We respect the world in which we operate. It begins with compliance with laws and regulations. We hold ourselves to the highest ethical standards and behave in ways that earn the trust of others. We depend on the relationships we have and respect each other and those we work with. We value diversity of people and thought. We care about the consequences of our decisions, large and small, on those around us. And please make special note of the large and small aspect, as we were discussing both decisions revolved around governments, states, companies, and individuals. I'm sure by now, as a board of directors, you know a lot about the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. But to provide some context for you, on April 20th, 2010, a few miles off the coast of Louisiana, there was a methane gas which built up, and as a result of some deficiencies in BP's testing, as well as BP's having to cut corners, unfortunately it exploded and ignited the entire oil rig in flames. I'm sure by now you know that 11 people died that day, and millions of gallons of oil fled into the Gulf over the next 87 days. 4.9 billion gallons to be exact. In the aftermath of this spill, there were many attempts by BP to clean up both the image of itself, of the Gulf, and to literally clean up the Gulf. We have one such example of an advertisement BP used to maintain both its own image and as well as bring back tourism to the Gulf, which I'll now bring up for you. And I'd like to make special note of the several BP logos which appeared throughout that advertisement, as we will be discussing the ethical issues related to these logos later in the event. Specifically, there was negative feedback regarding these logos, as people did not think that perhaps BP was dedicated to bringing back the Gulf, but was more dedicated by the intention of bringing back its own reputation. The impact in the region was twofold. First, there were numerous environmental damages, as you can imagine, related to the oil spill, hurting both wildlife, sea life, and plant life in the area. However, we will be focused more today on the economic damages, specifically loss of tourism related to both businesses and states. And now, I'll now turn it over to our legal analyst, Amanda Ozowski.
So, good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your legal analyst for today, and I'm going to talk about some of the legal issues and implications in terms of your marketing campaign, what you have actually had to pay for, and what you've done in terms of both bettering your own representation of your company within the Gulf region and the United States, and also in terms of enabling the Gulf Coast communities, which the spill has affected, to bolster their tourism and help their economies regrow after the spill. So let's look at what marketing costs your company was actually liable for. According to the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, your company actually does have a liability and does have to pay for all of the economic damage that resulted because of this spill. So any lost tourism, lost businesses, loss of income in terms of even small family companies, small municipalities, small towns, small governments, and statewide governments. All of the lost business because of bad press that was caused after the spill or because of damaged beaches and damaged waters does need to be repaid by your company. And you are still currently working on repaying these states and making whole for what was lost. So, under which laws? Again, that was the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which actually did have a cap of the amount of dollars that you would pay back in terms of total dollar amount for economic liabilities. However, your company was found to have been negligent, and as such, you no longer have a cap on the dollar amount of your economic damages settlement, which has become a huge issue in terms of your marketing campaign. So who can benefit? Again, that would be individuals, small municipalities, and the states. So, in terms of your marketing campaign, you can actually utilize this marketing campaign to better your relationships with the states and also to ensure that you're cutting your liabilities for the future so that you're not paying more money than you have to and you can rebuild your own company while also taking into account the perspectives of the states in which you operate and making ethical decisions. So you can grow as a company, you can continue to have a great marketing campaign, but you can also do that ethically. So let's look at your larger economic and property damages settlement, which is again the settlement that was not capped, which was formulated shortly after the BP oil spill and has a total funding dollar amount of about $20 billion as of now, which has been specifically set aside to deal with these various lawsuits coming in from various groups and individuals. So as of now, there is no total cap on that dollar amount. So I know that to you, ladies and gentlemen, this may seem a bit frightening. But again, we're going to talk about how marketing can actually help with this no cap limit and how you can better your relationships with the states to avoid future large lawsuits. So what you can do, one of your solutions, is actually to preemptively give grants to the states to help with their marketing campaigns. This will help bring money back to the states and will help increase their marketing efforts, especially if the states were not prepared to launch such large marketing campaigns as would be necessary after such a large spill. So it's really important that we take into account these local economies that were affected by the oil reaching the waters, or even when the oil didn't reach the waters. We've taken into account all the various states in the Gulf, including Florida. And the oil from this large oil spill that we had actually did not reach the coast of Florida. And yet we've still continued to give Florida millions of dollars in grants to help with their marketing campaign because of the bad press that we've received. So we do need to help them overcome that and make sure that people are going back to those areas and continuing to vacation, continuing to pay money, and those states are continuing to gain tax funding from those visitors. So how much have you paid to the states in your marketing campaign? You've paid about $175 million in grants that you've voluntarily given beyond what you had to give in any legal settlements. So before you've even gone to court and before you even had to pay these states a certain dollar amount, your company made a very wise decision of choosing to give grants to these states preemptively to ensure that their economies would continue to grow as soon as possible. So this in itself was a very wise decision that your company made shortly after the spill happened. However, you've also had particular dollar amounts that you've had included in this larger economic property damages settlement, which were specifically put in place to help with marketing efforts for individuals and small businesses which may have lost income as a result of the spill. So this is called the Gulf Tourism and Seafood Promotional Fund, and within this fund is a total of $57 million. So that is a lot less than the $175 million which you've given preemptively, but again, it's just more money that your company has provided in order to help these local small businesses which have been suffering. So public, quasi-public, non-profit groups, municipalities can all apply for grants within this particular settlement, and each applicant can receive a total of $500,000. So as you can tell, that may not be enough to help with marketing campaigns that would be needed to get more and more visitors to certain areas. So this is why your grants have been such a large help to this area. However, we still think that you can do more. So are there problems with the larger settlement, this economic and property damages settlement? Well, according to the lawyers that your company has hired that we have consulted with as well, there are some major problems with this entire settlement. So, according to the other legal analysts that we've consulted for your company, there are unjustified windfall payments to numerous businesses and claimants for non-existent and artificially calculated losses. So unfortunately, although we are doing our best, and although we know you're doing your best to help the states replenish their economies after this horrible accident that occurred, there are some companies and some individuals that in fact might be taking advantage of your generosity. And that's definitely something that needs to be looked into. For example, businesses that are hundreds of miles inland whose products don't necessarily need to be involved with wetlands or beaches or have nothing to do with the ocean water or the effect of oil on ocean water are actually applying for large grants that we're giving out as part of this larger no-cap settlement. And we don't understand why these companies would be needing part of our funds or why they would be deserving of them when we don't believe that your oil spill actually impacted their specific products and their specific ability to create those products and sell them. So BP's lawyers predict that fictitious losses could reach billions of dollars. And again, this settlement isn't capped. So we do need to continue to keep a close eye, hiring more lawyers perhaps, to keep an eye on the types of applications, the types of lawsuits that keep coming in, to make sure that the individuals, governments, and state entities that are applying for money through this lawsuit, through this larger economic damages and settlement fund, actually have valid reasons for their claims, and that we have to make sure that we are actually making whole for something that BP actually caused to these companies. So again, investing in states' marketing strategies through these grants, $175 million, was a very wise idea. And in fact, we would advise that you continue to do this to develop better relationships with the states, because with the negative publicity that's been coming in and with your current advertising campaign, we've noticed that a lot of people, especially in the Gulf region, don't have the best view of your company right now, and your relationships with these states needs to be better improved to not only improve your business, but to allow the public to trust you, which is part of your main ethical statement that we read to at the beginning. So it is legally and ethically wise to continue to aim BP's marketing efforts towards the cleanup and restoration of the Gulf region. But as we'll discuss later, it may not necessarily be in your best interest to continue to include your company's logo in so many of the advertisements. So again, enhancing your marketing campaign and increasing the monetary number of grants that we're giving to the states for marketing will help you and your business, and it will also help the Gulf with their economies. The more money that you're giving to these communities, the better they'll be able to overcome the negative press that's ensued as a result of this spill, the better their economies will be. At this point, it's best for BP to continue and negotiate a larger strategy, a larger settlement with states to make sure that you don't keep paying for this mistake that we've made. So I know that your company was in fact found to be negligent for some mistakes that you've made in terms of your safety precautions at this particular oil rig that exploded. And we know that you've continued to publicly make sure that these mistakes don't happen again. You've continued to teach other companies how to avoid these mistakes, which is great. But we also want to make sure that your company can stay afloat.
Right. Hello. My goals in discussing the financial analysis with you are threefold. First, I want to talk about the past effects of the oil spill on your bottom line. Second, I want to talk about the potential future effects of this economic damages settlement on the bottom line. And third, I want to present our solution in a financially viable context. So, following the oil spill, your shareholder value plummeted. Just to give you some numbers, in April 2010, in less than a 1 month period, your market share declined $105 billion to only $87 billion, which is a 14-year low. Now it's recovered slightly to about $140 billion, but this is still very much far away from the pre-spill highs. This occurred because in order to cover the expected damages, you engaged in a campaign of selling off assets, which as a result reduced earnings and reduced the multiple which your stock traded at. You budgeted for $42 billion initially of expected damages. However, all analysis suggests that this number can balloon and could come near to 60 or 70 billion dollars. And of that 42 billion, already you've spent about 30 billion dollars. So the biggest problem now facing your financial bottom line is this no cap aspect of this future financial damage settlement. This can result, if it's too high and if it's above the budgeted $42 billion, then you will have to engage in more sell-off of assets, which will result in smaller earnings, smaller multiple which your stock trades at, and your shareholder value will decrease even further. Now, when you take into account that at last standing, your company had 19.78 billion approximately in cash, this doesn't seem like such a significant problem. However, you have to consider the following factors. Number one, a lot of this money is committed elsewhere to other projects internationally. And number two, your company is also responsible for nearly $49 billion in debt, although you are currently renegotiating these contracts to try and get better terms. And in addition, as I've already said, total costs that you are originally budgeted for $42 billion are expected now to balloon. The recent estimates have suggested nearly $70 billion. So, it is in your best strategic financial interest to limit any future economic damages that you'll have to pay out. And we believe this can be done through a change in your overall marketing campaign. So the solution that we propose essentially is to increase marketing dollars going to states so that they can pay for their own marketing that they've had to take out of their own coffers so far as a result of the spill. So we suggest you continue to pay for that and pay for even more. Now, you've paid, as we've talked about, you've paid about $179 million in grants, which seems like a lot. However, when you take into account that you've allocated $500 million in grants, or $500 million so far to your own marketing campaign, this shows that, suggests that you're not putting as high priority on the state's marketing campaigns as perhaps you should. Now, increasing the state's marketing campaigns to above that $500 million number seems big. However, you can definitely afford it. Last year, your company made $22.68 billion in profits. And in addition, all these grants that you would be increasing, these grants are all tax deductible. So it's not as much as the $500 million as you'd be spending on your own marketing campaign. So, increasing these marketing campaigns, just to tell you, it's going to be tax deductible, and it'll help to protect you from future economic damages by hopefully increasing tourism dollars and limiting the amount of fraudulent claims that can come in. Now, it's definitely in your best interest to have a quick trial or a quick settlement rather than a long drawn-out trial. A long drawn-out trial, all that's going to do is going to continue having your name in the press. It's going to continue with a bad image on your logo. And in addition, it's going to keep this specter of this no-cap economic damages settlement that nobody knows how much that liability is going to be over your market cap. And so it's going to stop your market cap from going up a lot in the short term. It's going to hold down your stock price. Just to let you know how long these things can last, the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989, the legal fallout from that is still going on today. Now, the Exxon Valdez spill was a much smaller spill, and ExxonMobil is a lot larger company than yours is. So this cannot, going on for more than 20 years, that sort of thing cannot happen in this case if BP wants to recover any sort of its market cap or shareholder value. Now, if you do go to trial, which is unfortunate, but if you do, we would suggest that you try and keep it in federal court. All the states want to try you in their various state courts, but it has been in your best interest to try to do this battle in federal court because, number one, there's a difference between these things that how they're going to pay out. You'll have to pay in either fines or penalties. If you go to state court, you'll most likely have to pay through fines, which will require you to have to admit criminal liability or criminal negligence. And as a result, these payments will not be tax deductible. However, if you go through a federal court, then these payments will be through penalties, which will be tax deductible. And again, it will help your bottom line. Now, the reason these states want to go through state court and not federal court is, quite frankly, they don't quite trust you. You haven't been as forthcoming in information as perhaps you could have been. You have been making, as we'll talk later, you have been making strides to correct that. However, as again we'll talk about later, if you make sincere efforts to try and understand the perspectives of the states, then that'll hopefully engender good relations with them, and they won't put up so much of a conflict to try and keep it in state court and not fight it out in federal court. So, we think that increasing the marketing dollars, voluntarily increasing marketing dollars to these states to try and help them with the tourism, the fallen tourism that they're facing now, will help you in that.
Now, you've heard the legal analysis, you've heard the financial analysis, and you've heard the background. But one of the reasons you called us here today was to discuss the ethical questions stemming from this oil spill. But first, you might be asking, why should ethics matter? And it's important to note that you have an ethical obligation to both the communities, states, and individuals, not only in areas in which you operate, but anyone who comes into contact in any way with your company. This is an obligation that you have, as we noted earlier, noted. You have this as part of your mission statement. BP is answerable to these communities because these people have a right to know what you are doing. Transparency has been an issue in your campaigns, both to clean up the Gulf and to promote tourism. And finally, it is important for you to make a conscious effort to try to see what the people who you are affecting feel. And now, first ethical question. Is it ethical for BP to benefit from their ad campaigns in the Gulf? Now, a little while ago we showed you an advertising campaign, and while it did promote tourism, it also promoted BP in a very obvious way. BP logos were littered throughout that advertisement. Some might argue, and this has some merit to it, that the BP advertising is great because it benefits BP, and the tourism advertising is great because it benefits tourism. So why not bring them both together and essentially help two things at once? However, we would like to note that despite BP's attempts to make right what they've done in the Gulf, they have spent $179 million promoting Gulf tourism solely, but you have spent $500 million promoting your own image. Now, the argument that because BP has done so much for the Gulf that they should bring these two things together would hold water if it were not for the fact that BP has done so much more to promote their own image. If those two numbers were reversed and BP was doing more for the Gulf and then a little less for their image, it would make sense to bring the two together. However, when people see that BP is doing so much more for their own image and so much less for the Gulf, there's going to be a sense of betrayal that not only the individuals, but businesses and states will feel. And this is largely resulted in the state's anger towards BP. Second, is it fair for BP to pay for state tourism marketing in areas in which there was no environmental damages? As I'm sure you know, the oil spill was all over the Gulf. However, what a lot of the public does not realize is that Western Florida was not touched by any oil. That's correct. No oil reached the western coast of Florida. However, the public across the United States did not realize this. And they did not realize this. And as a result, tourism and revenue fell all over the Gulf, even in areas where they were not affected. The counterpoint to the argument would be, well, Western Florida had the best situation of all. They were the only one of these tourism areas that was not struck by oil. They were in the best situation. They should have taken advantage of it. However, it's a little far-fetched to consider that one small county in Western Florida can get by all of this white noise stemming from the media, who are literally saying the entire Gulf is covered in oil. It's a little far-fetched for them to say, no, the western coast of Florida is okay. They do not simply have that kind of marketing budget. And therefore, it is ethical that BP has to pay state tourism marketing in these areas because they have to make whole that which they took away. And finally, have you been transparent enough in regard to what happened? And I'm sure, as you know, at first, BP came under a lot of criticism for lack of transparency. Specifically, there were reports all over the nation which went on to cause a lot of criticism. That BP was not only not telling people what they were doing, what was going on, BP was actually not allowing reporters into the area. However, you have done a lot to make this right. BP has gone out, you have on your website numerous areas where people can read what's going on, what you have done, what you plan to do. So therefore, while you are not initially transparent enough, I would argue that because you have made strides to be better, you are now ethically in the right. It's important to know why it's important to be transparent, because people have a right to know what's going on. If you are not telling the people or the states or the governments what you are doing that's going to negatively impact their lives, that is in direct contradiction with your respect argument that we already brought up. You have pledged to respect these people, and by lying to them, or by simply not telling them what is going on, you're not respecting them.
So, a further ethical question has to be asked is it ethical, given your company's senior role in the crisis, is it ethical for your company to try and limit future economic payments? And we would say yes, it is, under certain conditions. First of all, your company needs to take responsibility for its past actions. It needs to take full responsibility for making sure that the Gulf area gets back to its pre-spill norms. And to do this, you need to do three things. First of all, you need to ensure that all of the beaches are in fact clean, so that tourists can actually really come back to it. Second of all, you do need to pay for the marketing costs that states have had to undertake in order to respond to this crisis that they had no part of. And third, you have to pay for past economic damages in the forms of lost revenue for businesses and for states. Now, this is a good solution to do. This is a good solution in order to try and limit economic damages if these past three criteria are met, because your company will take responsibility for its past actions and you'll be able to protect yourself from future economic damages. So most importantly, what it's going to do is going to try and promote the basic human flourishing within the communities in which you operate. And you do that by trying to make whole what your actions have taken away from these communities. So the big thing is to try and address these pre-spill, look at the pre-spill norms of the area, address what you've done to make it not so. And when you bring it back to what it was before the spill, then you would have, in our opinion, you would have no responsibility to try and keep paying these often fraudulent claims on lost future economic damages, if in fact you have done everything you can to address your own problems. So, we want to say, what else has BP done? Just with regards, we talked about they've increased in dollars, but they didn't have to. But what else have they done? Well, of the more money that's been required, just to tell you, only $57 million was required to be given to states through marketing grants. However, they end up giving $179 million. In addition, they've contributed a lot to researching the effects of oil spills on marine ecosystems. They have tried very hard to share its findings not only with the public, but also with its competitors, to make sure that industry-wide there are changes that are made to make sure something like this, on this scale certainly, does not happen again. They've also tried to maximize local employment in their cleanup and their research efforts. And finally, they've made efforts to put things like a wildlife hotline in for people to look and see if there's endangered wildlife, and they can try and help them. Now, all this is related to marketing from BP's image, so we have to ask, well, can you do better? And we say all the above is great. However, you can do more, because reports are coming in that research is now stopping because the money that BP has been given is stopping, because they're not required to give any more. We would say, keep doing it. Why would you stop it? There are certainly long-term effects of potentially of the oil spill on marine ecology that have not yet been addressed. So why would you stop it? If you're going to continue doing business in this area, you want to show the community in which you operate that you want to be a long-term partner, and you don't want to be just some external foreign force coming in and extracting resources. So in that same vein, keeping these research grants open, keeping these research laboratories open will also do your bit to increase more employment in the area, because employment has fallen in these partly because of the oil spill. Do more to directly influence this instead of just giving marketing dollars to try and bring back tourists to create employment that way. Do as much as you can to employ directly, as you have been doing. So the big thing is to make sure that you look at these communities in which you operate and you try and address their concerns. They have criticisms of you and they have their own perspectives, and if you truly make an effort to respect their opinions, then that will help you long term. It'll help reduce the amount of fraudulent claims, because it'll help bring tourists back. It'll stop states wanting to be vindictive. And as I said, continue to increase employment. That'll probably be the biggest thing to help engender good relations between the states and yourself.
Now, while this is a multifaceted issue, it's important to take a step back and examine a summary of what we've outlined. First, the settlement financially is definitely preferable to a trial. This is because of three reasons. First, a trial will only create further negative publicity for your company. And given the recent, what's been written in the press about your company over the last 2 years, that is the last thing BP needs financially. We do not want more people boycotting BP because of what they've heard in the media. Second, a trial will negatively impact your financial bottom line because trials are long, drawn-out processes. You have to pay much higher legal fees than you would if you simply settled. And you run the very high risk that you will get a judge who is very compassionate to the case of the states. Monetary rewards will do much to assuage the state's anger, and if you settle, will create a incentive for other states to settle because they know that you only have a finite amount of money, and once they see one state start settling, they will realize that that money is going to run out, and they need to soon settle, which will get better terms for your own settlements. And ethically, BP does not necessarily have a responsibility for future economic losses as long as they make right what was wrong and attempt to market the Gulf as okay. As long as BP gets the Gulf to where it was before, you do not have an ethical obligation to do any more than that.
So, just 2 weeks ago, we had further states' lawsuits because you did not take our initial advice. So, instead of increasing tourism dollars for the states, you continued on with your original plan. And now Florida is seeking $5.4 billion from you in economic damages, as is Mississippi, and as are Alabama and Louisiana. So, what can you do now? Well, continue to be transparent. Again, it's very important to be honest and open and respectful of the people in the communities in which you operate. Continue with your marketing campaign and continue giving grants to the states to enhance their marketing campaigns, make sure that their economies are flourishing. And above all, continue to make a conscious effort to understand the perspectives of the communities and the states in which you operate. Thank you.
Who would like to go first with the questions? I don't want to start from this end because it's not fair to Christine. Would anyone like to launch it?
I'll just start off. I thought it was a very good presentation. You gave us a lot of good information that we didn't know before. We've heard a lot about the finance in the past, but I like the perspective on it. And so I'd like to talk about the finances in relation to the business, the legal aspects, starting in, because that's the driver at this point. And I noticed that your solution comes up with more transparency. Do we have to spend more money to have the transparency?
Yes, in the short term, absolutely.
Short term.
Versus in short term, pay out more money now, or else risk this specter of this no-cap economic settlement coming down very hard, which it could be very big. And so that's the big thing facing BP is its shareholder value has been cut. It's still a very profitable company. It's got great margins, but the shareholder value fell heavily. And as a result, you have things like, for example, something we didn't talk about was the City of New York. Now, you might have lawsuits that you're not expecting. The City of New York has sued BP over this oil spill because they're representing one of their public pensions that has lost $39 million, and they're saying that BP did not accurately represent the threats of the oil spill to shareholder value. And so, yes, increasing transparency will require a cost outlay, but it's something that, we've looked at the profitability of BP, it can easily afford. What's going to hurt it is if they have a huge settlement that the only part of the entire Gulf settlement that hasn't really been accounted for yet, because you can't, there's no cap economic damages. Now, if that comes way above the $42 billion that you've already budgeted for, then that requires then more of a sell-off of income-producing assets. That's going to reduce your earnings, and your stock's going to trade at a lower multiple of that.
Thank you. May I just follow up just quickly for the next question? Because that's the financial, now the legal part of that, if we go to more transparency, which means giving more information, do you see this as a problem from a legal standpoint of increasing our exposure?
No, I don't see that at all as a legal issue. I think that, in fact, we have a duty to our us that we'll have a lot more lawsuits stemming from this incident, whereas if we continue to be more upfront and open with them, it will be better for our business, it will be better for these communities in which we operate, because, as we said, having the trust of the communities in which we operate is one of our most important company values. And legally, I can't see that it would be an issue to continue to be open and forthcoming with information regarding what we're doing now in terms of increasing our marketing campaigns and continuing with these lawsuits now, making sure that people understand what's going on. This doesn't necessarily include giving out top secret information or involving any sort of insider trading, which is definitely not legal. However, it does involve having information that may even negatively impact our company's press in the short run come out through the words of you all, the board of directors. It's important that if negative information is about to be revealed, it's important that you take responsibility and be forthcoming with the public. Even if you might feel uncomfortable doing this, it's ethically right and it's legally definitely acceptable.
I'd like to challenge the position you stated a few slides ago, in which you said that BP really doesn't have any future obligation, ethical obligation to pursue remediation in certain cases. I'd argue that, given the visibility of the topics of sustainability, responsibility, public citizenship, whatever you want to call it, particularly in Europe and domestically here, BP is now under a spotlight, and we are now held under a higher standard than the normal company. And so we cannot take that future obligation as a possibility. It is a requirement. And so what I hear your solution entailing is basically throwing a lot of money at tourism, spending money in other areas, supporting the ecosystem and so forth, but basically putting money towards tourism. And I'm questioning whether or not that solution is the right ethical position. And it looks like you have a rebuttal. Look out for it.
So what we refer to, it may sound off-putting to you all. You don't have a responsibility. But I believe that what we're trying to tell you is that, especially what's been happening lately with this no-cap settlement and the number of municipalities, individuals, governments, more particularly small businesses, golf businesses, for example, businesses that are a couple hundred miles inland in Florida or Alabama or Louisiana, coming forward and suing your company for losses that your legal analysts, besides myself of course, don't believe that you've actually owed them. So some companies, as I mentioned, companies that may be producing products like plastic or clothing, are coming forward and suing your company for their loss of business, when in reality, some of these companies cannot prove that the oil spill actually led to their loss of business. So I believe that what we're referring to is actually doing our best to make whole now, of course, as best as we can. Of course, there are certain aspects of this that we cannot foresee. For example, the environmental damage, which was not why we're called here today, although that would be under a separate legal act, the Clean Water Act specifically. So you still have separate legal obligations under those long-term environmental implications. But what we're referring to is your environmental damages implications, and how you can actually prevent paying large amounts of money in the future is with a settlement. And a settlement is actually an all-encompassing payment that also includes future losses. So as long as you properly estimate your future losses, you can actually pay that amount of money in a settlement now and avoid having to pay it in the future. So you are going to pay for any future losses that may occur that have been proven to be valid and sound and reasonable, and also that you will agree to, that the states will agree to, but you won't have to pay them in the future. So it will be better for your market shares now and your stocks now, because people will know exactly how much money BP is going to have to pay for this oil spill.
And in addition, we're not saying that BP, that you have no responsibility in the future. We're just saying that the financial responsibility of that, if you've addressed all the problems and you've fixed the Gulf ecosystem and the economy, have to be limited for the sake of just ethically for BP and for the sake of its market share. In addition, the responsibilities include, you're going to have to change your entire procedures. As you know, the reason that the spill happened was because of cost cutting. So you're going to have to make a promise to all communities in the future that you're going to change your procedures, which will require probably more costs throughout your entire business to ensure that safety is met. So those are the type of things that, we're not saying you have no responsibility, you have actually huge responsibility, but within the context of this future economic damages settlement, that responsibility is quite limited, in our opinion.
And going off your change of procedure, that's something BP has done an excellent job of doing. You have not only made changes to your own procedures, but you've also made great steps to educate other companies of what went wrong and what they need to do better in the future.
My question is regarding, I think what we're here for, what we're hearing, the whole point of this is that we're engaging in a process to rebuild trust. We've had this horrible accident, and now we're sitting here at the board. What are the right steps that we should take to rebuild trust in the community, across the nation, across the world? And, you know, I, looking at that perspective, don't know if you can rebuild trust through self-marketing. I think it takes your actions and others seeing those actions to build that trust. So I would almost argue that we don't engage in a self-marketing campaign, and we do put extra resources into helping those other groups, these areas, market themselves, and really let our actions in the community be our marketing. And I think our consultants
we'd all agree. We said, you know, whether or not it's your decision strategically to try and rebuild your brand, what you have to do is show that you have a higher financial priority for states' marketing campaigns rather than your own. I just said it was $500 million for your own marketing campaign versus $179 million, most of which was voluntary, true, but only $179 million for your own marketing campaigns. And we say that ratio has to be reversed. You have to have a higher priority for these state marketing campaigns.
Of course, and I would definitely agree with my colleague, but in terms of letting the Gulf know what we've been doing, I think that a certain amount of self-advertising is important. Because as you know, if you're just a regular family living in a community and you know the negative things that happened, maybe you aren't going out to search for, well, what are they doing right now? So I think that it is partly a good idea for our marketing campaign to focus on what we've done so that people realize that, just because I don't think that an average consumer would go out and do the research into what we've been doing that's positive in their communities. Although what you have done is create a very transparent, very easy to utilize website that's available to the public with all of the different activities that you did in the past in response to the spill and that you're doing today in terms of research, increasing jobs, and also just making sure that you're cooperating with the states. So I think that you are doing that, but I think at the same time, from our perspective as marketing consultants, having that publicity out there to a certain extent, telling the public what you're doing is a wise idea.
So I just want to clarify, so you're in our marketing campaign, the big issue is we have BP logos, and you think some of the concerns or feelings, the negative feelings out there regarding our marketing campaign would be put at ease if we just remove the logos.
I think from an ethical standpoint, we definitely need to take into perspective what that might look like from an average consumer's point of view. If you live on these beaches and you've grown up there, your family plays in these beaches, you vacation there yearly, etc., and you see BP coming out with ads that include your logo immediately after the spill, I think that from an average consumer's point of view, of course, that's going to produce some negative feelings. Again, as my colleague Eric said, a feeling of betrayal, which is definitely something that we're trying to remedy. So it's not only that, but it was also an issue of transparency, which is part of your marketing campaign now. Again, as we mentioned before, telling the public what you've done in the past and what you're doing now. So those are our two main issues that you've called us here to analyze today.
Yeah, and that was going to be my point, was taking aside the fact that we want a bigger budget towards tourism and that aspect of it. From the company perspective, your point of transparency, I think, is very good. Like, you should really admit, you know, we were in this mode of cost cutting and that led to this act. We admit we're wrong. If we are wrong, this was our fault. Here's what we're doing about it. And maybe that could be a separate campaign from tourism and advice, you know, so both parties are benefiting in the role that they need to benefit by, but it's not so in your face, come to Louisiana because BP is telling you to. So I think it's more of a statement than a question, that I think you've looked at both aspects and have really thought that out pretty well. I agree with that.
Yes, sure. I thought you guys did a great job. It's just a question in the context of working towards settlement in an ethical way versus running through litigation. Have any of these states come to us and proposed settlement in this particular context?
Yes, they have, but they've been rejected because they've been just absolutely untenable for BP, for your company. They haven't been serious. There needs to be something where the BP can actually say, okay, yes, we can do that, but the amount of future economic damages that's been included has just been astronomical.
And we've had outside legal consultants, besides myself, look into what the actual projections of future losses, past losses, current losses are. And we've tried to analyze this into projections for what a valid settlement would look like. And none of these states' proposals have been quite where we wanted them. They've been very high, which we definitely would attribute in part to the state's anger towards your company after the spill. There's been, again, a lot of negative relationships, a lot of feelings of tension between our company and the Gulf areas, which is definitely not something that we want in an area that we're operating in, an area that we're trying to provide services to. That's definitely not something that we want. So that is definitely, we believe, part of the reason why these settlements have been so high. And again, some of that is also could be potential fictitious claims, which need to be addressed in the future in terms of settlements as well. Definitely something that needs to be overcome here is that acting ethically doesn't necessarily mean that we're enslaved to the state's desires. I think that a lot of misconceptions that board members such as yourselves have is that companies who act ethically towards communities in which they operate are basically going to have to pay more money, lose business, cannot grow as a company, their stock prices are going to go down if they do something that's ethical as opposed to profitable. But oftentimes we need to realize that what is ethical is often going to be good for your business as well.
And it's important to note that there's a reason that you cannot settle with the entire region at one time, and you have to settle with each individual state. And that reason stems from the fact that different states have different needs. We talked about the fact that Louisiana has a lot of oil on the beaches and a lot of environmental damages, but Florida has no environmental damages and strictly economic damages. So while it might be convenient to settle with the entire region at once, it simply cannot be done because each state is suing for different reasons.
I guess as a relatively new board member of BP, not on the board when the oil spill happened, I'm really particularly concerned about credibility and the ability to move forward. You've said several times we can afford it, and I guess my question is, I get concerned about the fact that there's an assumption that we have, really deep pockets and that we're one of the wealthiest companies in the world and all of that. And money is obviously what these other states are needing. But have you, in your proposal to us, got any information about what would be required of us in terms of addressing the animosity and the hostility that the other states have toward us, that's more than just increasing their marketing budgets? You talked about people talking and listening. Mm-hmm. What have you come up with that is helpful to us about how BP should operate differently in the context, excuse me, of the states that whatever money we give may never be enough? So what else is it that we need to do in order to allow this mistake to be part of history, not because of our dollars, perhaps, as much as because of how you might counsel us in our interactions with these states? What else can we do?
Well, as I think I touched on before, it's not just about, as you're absolutely right, just paying out marketing dollars and saying, okay, go away. It's, you're still going to be doing business in these states. So if you're going to stay there, what I want, I think what we all want you to do is not to come and be this foreign entity coming and extracting oil, and paying people for their labor. That's not, we want you to be a long-term partner with them. And I think that's what they want too. That's so, as I said, as we were talking about things like the research grants that are, you first gave them out and then you okay, well, we've done what was required, so let's pull them back. We absolutely think that's an absolutely wrong thing to do. Instead, go and keep giving them, fund some chairs in universities. Say, probably anonymously would be best, but, come out and say, look, here's the marine, we have research centers for marine ecology. There are long-term effects of oil as well on the marine life. Recently, fish have been washed ashore with lesions on them in the Gulf area, and that's just a recent occurrence. That's not something that happened before. So there are most probably long-term effects that haven't been studied that now your company is ignoring. by pulling back your research dollars. So don't do that. Stay and say, look, we're going to stick it out with you. You're going to, whatever happens here, you're going to have to live with it. And so are we, because we're going to still be here working. And, you know, as I said, also continue to employ as many people in that area as possible and not outsource.
Those are two good suggestions. I guess I'm wondering, do you have any other suggestions that would help our reputation in the context of the lack of trust that's operating?
Well, increased transparency would be the biggest
Right.
thing. Because, I mean, we didn't really talk about it, but in terms of transparency, if we're being honest, you lied about the amount of oil that was in the Gulf. You lied about how, you know, you were had very confusing system of how people could apply for money to try and get from lost revenues. You had this confusing system people didn't quite understand. You would send people different paper pushers who just moved it around, didn't do anything. So there has been a huge lack of transparency to that, and you have addressed it. And I would say go further addressing it. You know, make it absolutely open. And, you know, I mean, this sounds, and again, we didn't want to sound obvious with this, but it was almost so obvious that nobody thinks about it, is make an effort to be transparent, to show people, because you're working in their community, and if you're not being transparent, you're not respecting them as partners.
When you say transparent, could you just explain what you mean?
Say, absolutely take full responsibility for what you've done.
And they said that.
$4.9 million.
And you said that. So beyond that, what are you talking about that would change our behavior in terms of increased transparency?
Well, in terms of going forward, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, well, be open about your procedures, for example. About not only with the communities as well, but also with other companies. You know, as again, my colleague made the point that we're not talking about sharing top secret information. We're simply talking about saying, these are what we found, you know, this is the amount of money extra that has to be spent on this, and this is what we found is the safest way to go about drilling and not cutting costs. This is how we're doing it, and make it public to everybody. And make all information easily accessible and in an easily understandable manner is another thing. And then and also a potential, as I said, short-term thing you could do is, you know, I mean, we've talked about marketing, but it shows, as I said, respect. That you realize that these states had to initially go out of their coffers and pay for something that they had no part in doing. And so we want to stress the marketing as well. You know, it's something that, look, this is just a good first step. Is say, you know, it's not just we want to pay you the marketing and go away. It's we're going to pay you this, and we want you to take this as a sign of how we're going to go, how we're going to treat you going forward. We're going to be partners in this.
Any other questions?
Yeah, of course. That's not my question. Okay, how do you stop this list? Okay, got it. As you well know, taking the ethical path can be challenging. And much of your financial discussion was based on limiting liability. And some of that concern was based on fraudulent claims. And I sense that you were also almost dismissive in some of the claims that you used as examples, maybe, you know, a clothing company way upstream or in another part of the country. What level of effort would you recommend that we, as a board, pursue to ensure that that clothing company's sole job wasn't to create promotional T-shirts for the Gulf Coast? I mean, because they would have a valid claim. So how would you recommend that we pursue this?
Of course, and with that would again have to do with your main legal team. So you would have to make sure that your legal team is looking into every case. And again, that might involve spending some more of your funds that you have initially in perhaps hiring more lawyers or hiring counsel to go out to these places and investigate in person. And again, I think that sort of relationship, provided that it's done well and again not done dismissively, could help your relationship with the states if you're going out and interacting with these people, not in a sort of investigative manner, but in a sort of, can you tell us about how this affected you? Can you tell us more about your company? And getting to understand their perspectives and going out, not just making phone calls or doing paperwork, but really becoming more involved with our counsel that we have that's going out and working with these people in terms of the claims that are coming in.
Any other questions?
I'm fine, thank you.
Then the next part is purely to give you feedback on the presentation and anything that occurs to us that might be helpful to you. Fair? And who'd like to start?
that be the start? You go ahead.
Sure, I can start. I thought you guys did a really good job. I guess my context of generally speaking to a board is in the context of not a committee. And oftentimes when framing information, sometimes in the role of consultant and such, it's a little difficult to make or say phrases like, you can afford it. This is something for you. And there were a couple times that I wrote a few things down like that where I think that if I were truly a VP board member, I might have gotten a little bit defensive in carrying on the rest of the conversation with you. So just framing the context of discussions a little bit, but overall.
Yeah, I mean, I would say highly educated on the subject. There was a lot of detail. I mean, you guys, really, none of you ever seemed scripted at all, which was really amazing to me, the amount of data that you were able to speak to. So that was really, a strong point of yours. So congratulations on that. And really, the only feedback for me is positive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same. I appreciated that it was very thoughtful and it was easy to follow. There was clear delineation throughout the presentation of moving on to this, so you could follow along and really grasp the greater concept and the greater argument. I appreciated, or I enjoyed that. You didn't just settle for, let's do what's legal. You did try to raise the bar, let's do what's ethical, let's do what's right. You can have different opinions on what that next level is, but I think you guys went for that. I think it's also important to put it in the context of what are short-term responsibilities in good corporate citizenship and rebuilding trust, and what are long-term responsibilities. And again, you can have a different opinion of what those steps are, but I'm glad that it was addressed in your presentation. So yeah, I would just,
Thank you.
Just to reiterate what Christine said, be mindful of your audience. I've presented to boards and been witness to board meetings where some of the phrases you used and some of the ways in which you presented the information, you would have been not only shut down but kicked out. And that's just the way it would have been. So the other comment was, in addition to you doing a great job, I want to get that in there. At first, when you presented yourself as the legal expert, you spent a lot of time on financial topics. And I started to kind of try and bring myself back to, are we talking about the legal issues? And I know you did it in the context of dissettlement, but it was all finance. And you, under the context of finance, were talking about the difference between federal court and state court. And I'm not sure if, I'm sure, it certainly worked, but it was a little confusing at times. But overall, I think it did great.
Thank you.
Often when people make presentations and everything is spontaneous, and the impression already is that from all the judges is that all three of you were in the zone. You knew exactly what you were trying to convey to us, and you explained it in your own way. And yes, there was overlapping between the two, but it rolled into a total understanding. The key thing, I think, when it comes to transparency, which is an idea about credibility, is telling the people, involve the public in your problem by telling them what that problem is, and then how they can help you solve it by just listening. And that becomes very important. I thought you did a very good job, all three of you, because each one of you threw it back and forth in a different way. The financial, the legal, the ethical, all these different things of talking about transparency and how it would work with your solution. So I thought that was very well done. So congratulations, you did a good job.
Thank you.
I think you did too, but it took me a while to recover, and it was something that you said, Amanda. It took me a while to recover from something you said, because you repeated it several times. That I think, in some ways, it's understandable that a consultant wants to make the client, feel good about what they've done. But you kept repeating the issue of claims that might not be legitimate. And from the standpoint of a company whose ethical commitments have been slow to come, rather than the consultant necessarily building trust with the board about, if your strategy was to build trust, so they'd listen to some of the things that they might not want to hear, I don't know if that was your strategy, it can backfire on you. Because I've been in company situations where lawyers particularly talk a lot about what they don't have to do, and that's what the client hears. The client doesn't hear the other stuff because they don't want to hear it. And there's unlimited liability in some of this other stuff. And so I think that it's a useful tool, but you repeated it like 3 times. And so I think that something like that, whereas I didn't catch some of the other things that you only repeated once or twice that were more impactful to the larger question of helping move a company to a more ethical response. And so while it, in the questions, we pulled out of you what we needed to know about where you were talking about, what you were really trying to say. You wouldn't get that in a board situation, and so you might not, if your goal was to make them more ethical, you might not end up with them moving as far as the research lab and some of these other things, which have enormous implications for the future. And I think you started with a really important beginning, and it would have been great if somebody had ended with that, about what they say they stand for. And the challenge is that I understand where you spent a lot of time on the logo, not logo. I think that time would have been especially well spent helping them honor what it is now that the world is looking at, because they have no choice to judge them with. And I think that's a very powerful tool for you to be able to move them forward, because they're already on record. They're already committed to that. And so with the limited amount of time that a board has to digest what they're being asked to do, going back to this is to help you achieve what you've already said is fundamental to you. That's more palatable, I think, than the side issue of whether there are people trying to exploit them, because they've invited that. I mean, and business understands that, and lawyers are all too quick to shut that down. So that point was least helpful to me in the overall context, but it didn't diminish the fact that collectively and individually you certainly passionately spoke about what BP should do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Good job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Very good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say again? Very good job. Very good job. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's right.